The Young and the Restless spoilers, Tuesday full episode September 17th, 2024. Sharon was spiraling. Nick had taken all the steps he thought were necessary. He'd scheduled an appointment with a top psychiatrist, hoping Sharon would get the help she so desperately needed. But she never showed up. Nick rushed to her house, his heart pounding with anxiety. What greeted him at the door was far worse than he had expected. The once pristine home was now in shambles. Trash littered the floor, old newspapers were strewn about, and dirty dishes had piled up in the sink. Clothes, unwashed and wrinkled, were scattered across the living room, almost as if Sharon had stopped caring about everything around her. The air was thick with the stale scent of neglect. Sharon was nowhere to be seen. Nick called out her name, but the only response was the eerie silence that seemed to fill every corner of the house. His chest tightened as the overwhelming sense of dread sank in. Sharon was not okay, he knew that much. Something was terribly wrong, and it had been building up for weeks, if not months. Sharon had always been strong, but this? This was a sign that she was slipping further into a dark place. Nick's thoughts raced. He wanted to help her, but how? Part of him wanted to lock the doors, to force Sharon to stay inside where he could watch over her, make sure she didn't hurt herself or spiral any further. But deep down, Nick knew that if he did that, it would only make things worse. Sharon had always been fiercely independent. Trying to control her, to force her into getting help, would only push her away. She would feel trapped, and the situation would spiral even more out of control. But what could he do? Nick was at a loss. The woman he loved was falling apart, and no matter what he tried, nothing seemed to reach her. He was terrified that if he didn't do something soon, he would lose her for good. Sharon, in her fragile state, had become unrecognizable to him. Yet, he couldn't give up. Not when so much was at stake. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Victoria was dealing with a betrayal of her own. She lay in bed with Cole, the warmth of their moment already fading as her mind wandered back to Kyle's treachery. During a fleeting moment of vulnerability, she had confessed to Cole that Kyle was a traitor, a man who was unworthy of Claire's trust and affection. Victoria's blood boiled with rage. She wanted to punish Kyle, to expose him for the snake he truly was. But the opportunity hadn't come yet, and she couldn't act impulsively. Not with so much at stake. Kyle had kissed Summer behind Claire's back. That much was clear. He had reignited an old flame with Summer, even while Claire was blinded by her own happiness. Claire, poor innocent Claire, had no idea that the man she adored was betraying her. She was living in a bubble, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beyond her vision. Every time Claire spoke about Kyle, her face lit up with joy, and it made Victoria sick to her stomach. Victoria knew that Claire and Kyle hadn't slept together yet, which gave her some solace. But time was running out. If Claire went any deeper into her relationship with Kyle, the consequences would be devastating. Victoria needed to stop this before it escalated any further. Kyle's deceit was festering like a wound, and if it wasn't dealt with soon, it would only grow worse. Claire was a delicate soul, trusting and innocent. She had placed her faith in Kyle, believing that he was her future. Victoria could see the heartbreak coming from miles away, and it pained her to think about how Claire would react when the truth came out. Claire would be shattered. She had never experienced betrayal like this before, and Victoria feared that her daughter would be left broken and disillusioned. If Claire found out about Kyle's affair with Summer, it would destroy her. She was the kind of girl who gave everything to the people she loved, and if Kyle's betrayal came to light, it would be a cruel awakening. Claire had always believed in the goodness of people, and this would shatter that belief in a way that would be hard to recover from. Victoria's heart ached for her daughter. She knew that Claire would feel as though the ground had been ripped out from under her, and Victoria wasn't sure how to protect her from the pain that was inevitable. But she also knew that Kyle couldn't be allowed to get away with this. He needed to face the consequences of his actions before things went too far. As Victoria sat in her thoughts, Claire was blissfully unaware of the storm building around her. She continued to believe that Kyle was the man of her dreams, the one she was destined to marry. She trusted him completely, never suspecting for a moment that he was betraying her with Summer. Her innocence, while beautiful, left her vulnerable. And it was only a matter of time before the truth would come crashing down around her. Claire had always been a trusting soul, but something about Kyle's recent behavior just didn't sit right with her. Her instincts, usually calm and steady, were now sounding alarms. She had noticed subtle changes in Kyle, his sudden disappearances, vague excuses, and the way he would avoid eye contact when she asked about his day. Though Kyle kept insisting that his visits to Summer's house were only to see Harrison, Claire wasn't convinced anymore. One day, after yet another rushed and poorly explained visit to Summers, Claire decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't shake the feeling that Kyle was hiding something, and so she followed him. Her heart raced as she discreetly tailed his car, the adrenaline pushing her forward despite the gnawing fear that she might uncover something she wasn't ready to face. Kyle parked in front of Summer's house, just like he said he would, and went inside without a second glance. Claire sat in her car across the street, her breath shallow and her mind running wild with possibilities. For the first few minutes, she tried to convince herself that everything was fine, Kyle was just visiting Harrison, like he always said. But then the doubts crept in. What was really going on behind those closed doors? Claire waited, staring at the house, imagining the worst. She knew that Harrison was important to Kyle, but was that the only reason he visited Summer so frequently? The uncertainty was eating away at her. She couldn't stand it anymore. She needed answers, and the only way to get them was by keeping a closer eye on Kyle. She waited for what felt like hours, but nothing happened. The door remained closed, and there was no sign of Kyle or Summer. Claire considered leaving, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Her gut told her that Kyle wasn't being truthful, and she wasn't about to let it go. She needed to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Meanwhile, back in his own world of battles and power plays, Victor Newman was facing frustration of a different kind. He had meticulously planned a new business strategy and wanted his daughter, Victoria, to be at the forefront of it. Glissade, a company Victor had recently taken control of, needed someone strong, capable, and ruthless. In his mind, Victoria was the perfect fit. She had the experience, the sharp mind, and most importantly, she was a Newman. It was time for her to step up and help secure their family's dominance in the corporate world. But Victoria had other plans. She was tired of these endless business wars, the constant scheming, and the manipulation that came with working under her father's thumb. She had her own career, her own ambitions, and the idea of getting involved in Victor's latest venture left her cold. The battles for control at Glissade seemed trivial and unnecessary to her, especially with all the drama surrounding Kyle, Summer, and Claire. Her personal life was already chaotic enough without adding her father's corporate games into the mix. When Victor proposed the idea, Victoria flatly refused. Her voice was firm, and there was no hesitation. "I'm not interested, Dad," she said, crossing her arms defiantly. "I don't want to be part of another one of your ridiculous power struggles. You can fight those battles on your own." Victor's anger flared immediately. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not by his own daughter. He had spent years building an empire, and now he needed her to take her rightful place within it. The fact that she was rejecting his offer felt like a personal betrayal. "This isn't a request, Victoria," he snapped, his eyes dark with frustration. "This is your family's legacy. Glissade is a major part of our future, and I need you there." But Victoria wasn't swayed. She knew her father's manipulative tactics too well, and she wasn't about to let him pressure her into something she didn't want. "I've already told you, I'm not interested," she repeated. "I'm done with these power games, Dad. Find someone else to fight your battles." Victor's fury only grew at her defiance. He had always been able to rely on Victoria, but lately, she had become more independent, more resistant to his control. Her refusal felt like a slap in the face, and for a man like Victor, used to commanding loyalty and obedience, it was unbearable. "You're making a mistake, Victoria," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll regret this." But Victoria stood her ground. She was no longer the young, impressionable daughter who used to seek his approval. She had built her own life, and she wasn't about to let her father's anger dictate her choices. "Maybe," she replied coolly, "but it's my mistake to make."